Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, May 17th. My name is Heather Krause, and I'm the founder of an organization called We All Count. And I am so delighted that you have found your way to Talking Data Equity today. Talking Data Equity is an informal gathering where anybody from any sector, from any geography, who's interested in trying to learn practical, concrete ways to improve the equity in the data work that you're doing can come and learn some new things, have some conversations, share some resources, and most importantly, remember that you are not alone. It can feel sometimes like you are the only person in your team or in your department or in your organization or in your school, but you are not. So that's what we do on Fridays. The Zoom link stays the same. So if you've been here one Friday, you can come at any other Friday that you like. You don't have to pre-register. It's purely drop-in. And sometimes on Talking Data Equity, we talk about a technique or we really get into the ins and outs of a specific choice. And sometimes we have a special guest. And our special guest today is so special to me personally that I've been very excited. Our special guest today is Dr. Alberto Cairo. And I will tell you some of the kind of official things about Dr. Cairo. But before that, I will just say that Alberto is a very, very special and unique person, a really amazing combination of incredibly smart, uniquely innovative, and kind all at the same time, which is a unique thing to find in a person. And Alberta really helped me find my way through data viz. I was very resistant to like lists of rules and the dogmatic approach. So I was like, I don't think I can be part of the data viz community. And Alberto really helped me understand that there was lots of people like him in the data visualization profession who were very thoughtful and were happy to share their expertise in a way that wasn't quite as prescriptive. And the last personal thing I'll say about Alberto is, Alberto, you might not even know this, but you were the very last non-family person I saw right before the pandemic, because Yeshi from Black Lives Data for Black Lives and I were down in Miami doing an event with Alberto, opening up. Alberto is a professor of visual journalism at the University of Miami, and they were opening their data science program or school, college. And it was just days before the Canadian-US border closed. And so you were the last, and I thought about it, of course, all the time because I had, no other contact. So that is my personal connection with Alberto. And the more formal introduction is that Alberto is a world-renowned data visualizer. Alberto knows how to think about data and design and computer code. He is a professor at the University of Miami School of Communications. He is also, I believe, the art director at the Google Data Viz initiative. I'm not sure. I don't think I have that name right, but a Google associated data viz undertaking. And he writes so many books. I have never known Alberto to not either be in the middle of publishing or writing a book. And his most recent book is called The Art of Insight. Very, very interesting. I have read it in the last few weeks again to get ready for today. And his earlier books, The Functional Art, The Truthful Art, and How Charts Lie, are some of the most foundational and accessible books that you can get if you want to learn about both how to do data viz and as also how to consume data viz. So I will put more links to many of the cool things that Alberto does, but I don't want to take up too much of our short time singing Alberto's praises. So instead, I will just say, Alberto, I am so, so grateful that you are here, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. I was blushing here, honestly. I really appreciate a kind introduction. So, yeah, all right. So I'm going to share my screen. So Heather was mentioning that I've written several books throughout the years. I am right now in the process of putting together an idea for a complete revamping of my courses, and that may end up becoming also a new book, which will touch upon many of the topics that Heather and all of you are interested in, considering that we're talking about data equity and ethics and things like that. And provisionally, I decided to call this project my new fundamentals of data communication. Probably the final title will be different. But this is the title that I have decided to put the current presentation. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to use this presentation as an opportunity to think out loud with you about the topics that I would like to touch upon in this new presentation, this new workshop, this new class, and potentially this new book. These fundamentals that I mentioned in the title may not be what you may be thinking. Right? Most of the books out there about data visualization, including my own, How Chats Lie and The Truthful Art, and so on and so forth, take this sort of like positivistic and functionalist approach to data visualization. They are all about for example, how to choose the best chart for every occasion, how to think about the data, how to present the data effectively and efficiently. And obviously, all that is part of the fundamentals of data visualization. There's no question about that. But we need to expand, I think, what we consider fundamental when we teach data visualization. And that is what the new book or the new talk will be about. All my books up to the Art of Insight, what they have in common, even if one of them focuses on something is slightly different. The functional art is an introduction. The truthful art is sort of like a presentation of descriptive statistics, mostly through the use of visualization. How Chat Slides, a book for the general public, and the Art of Insight is sort of like my tribute to the world of data visualization. But what they all have in common is this idea that I think that data visualization and more broadly, information design, they are a language. And it's a language, or they are languages that can be used essentially by anyone and everyone, not only to present ideas more effectively, but also to reason more effectively about the information that we have in front of us. So very similarly to writing or to teaching. I mean, I usually tell people that one of the best ways to test whether you understand a notion or a concept well is whether you can teach about it in a clear way or whether you can write about it. And the process of writing about that will clarify the ideas further. Visualization works in a very similar way. And anybody can learn how to visualize well. And I have the opportunity to test this idea every single semester. Before you all joined, I was talking to Heather about the composition of the student body in my classes, and most of the students that I get these days are biologists, climate scientists, data scientists, statisticians who want to learn how to better communicate using visualization. And the good news is that I test this idea, everybody can learn how to design data visualizations effectively. These are two projects that were designed, big posters that were designed by students of mine in my classes, students who at the very beginning of the semester had no experience whatsoever with information design or data visualization. And through the application of certain tricks and tips and techniques that I teach in my classes, everyone learns how to design effectively, the same way that everybody can learn how to write well, right? Maybe we will not become a Shakespeare, obviously, but we can all learn how to write correctly. Anyway, so going to these, talking a little bit about these basics or new basics, there's still some fundamentals that need to be taught. For example, I usually go back to sort of like some of the foundational concepts of a data visualization. For example, John Tukey, obviously, probably many of you knows who Tukey was. He was a famous statistician whose work in the second half of the 20th century was fundamental to the world of statistics. He also wrote extensively about data visualization. He has this book titled Exploratory Data Analysis. And one of the most famous quotes by Tukey was, "The greatest value of a picture is that it forces us, it makes us see things that we cannot normally see, what we never expected to see." So this is sort of like the analytical way to understand data visualization. Data visualization may reveal realities that we may not be able to access if the data that we are analyzing is not being visualized in the first place. I still embrace this notion. I think that this lies at the core of data visualization, but I also believe, and this is one of the topics that I touch upon in The Art of Insight, my most recent book, that we need to expand a little bit on what we consider, for example, insight. And I'm going to show you one of the examples that appear in The Art of Insight. This is actually the example that appears in the prologue of The Art of Insight. It's a data visualization. It's actually a series of data visualizations designed by my friend Shirley Wu, one of the many people I collaborated with for projects designed for Google. That's one of my side projects. But in any case, Shirley, during the pandemic, before the pandemic, and then after the pandemic, she visualized the photographs that she took month by month and year by year. She loves photography. She loves taking photos of food and of plants and flowers. And after and during the pandemic, she realized that the way that she took photographs changed before and after the pandemic. And she decided to build a beautiful visualization project based on that, titled Wonder and Hope. By the way, I forgot to mention that I'm going to share all these slides with you after I finish talking, so you will all get to learn a little bit more about all these projects by clicking on those links. So what is it that you're seeing? Take a look at this, right? This is a graphic that shows essentially every single dot, every single symbol that you have here is a photograph that Shirley took in March of 2018, meaning before the pandemic. Each dot represents a photograph. The symbol, if it is a flower, represents a flower photo. If it is a circle, that's a food photo, and then other types of photographs. And then the photographs are color-coded based on the most predominant color of the photograph. And then the circle, the little dots, are positioned according to how far the photo was taken from Shirley's home, right? This circle over here represents Shirley's home. She was living in Tokyo at the time. So you can see that she took a few photographs inside her home that month, but most of the photographs were taken outside of her home, up to 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers away from her home. But now take a look at what happens during the pandemic. The circles shrink, right? And most photographs are taken. There are much fewer photographs being taken on April 2020, May, and et cetera, during the pandemic. Much fewer photographs, and then most photographs are taken inside of her home during the pandemic. She describes this project as a way for her to visualize sort of like depression that she felt throughout the pandemic, and then how she'll recover, the sense of wonder and the sense of hope as months pass by. It's an absolutely wonderful project, wonderful visualization project that I would encourage you to all to learn about more. But as you may notice, if any of you is familiar with the sort of like the fundamentals, the traditional fundamentals of data visualization, is not a particularly efficient visualization. I mean, if anybody can say, you can argue, well, maybe you could have visualized these through a line graph or a bar graph, right? The patterns will be clearer. And that is true if you take a functionalist approach to data visualization, but that was not the purpose of this visualization. The purpose of this visualization was not to be an analytical tool in the traditional statistical sense. It was more to become an analytical tool to explore Shirley's own life, and also a tool for self-expression, and a tool to make you feel something about it. And that's one of the topics that I touch upon in The Art of Insight, which we'll probably follow up in this new project, that data visualization is really not applying rules that are set in stone. This is another very common topic in all my books, but I expanded on it greatly in The Art of Insight, talking about the different dialects that exist in the world of data visualization. designing a visualization is not about applying rules. It's about reasoning about possible choices. And those choices that we can make are based on the interplay of different factors. This is something that doesn't appear in the Art of Insight, but will probably appear in this new project that I want to work on. There are several factors that we need to consider. The content itself, what is the nature, the origin, the limitations of the uncertainties of the information that we are dealing with, the people, who the audience is. And then if the data refers to people, I think that I am borrowing this saying from Heather, who is being counted and who is not being counted, right? That also is an important consideration in data visualization. Then the intent, what is it that we want to communicate with that data visualization? That also should influence the reasoning that we make to make choices about the graphics, the constraints, for example, the platform where the visualization is going to appear, and also extremely important, what the consequences are of our work. How is our visualization being used or misused in different cases? One of the points that I make in the Art of Insight is that every decision that we make, no matter what you have read in any book about data visualization, any decision that we make when we design a visualization is subjective, period. Some people react negatively to this. Oh, say, no, but how can you say that this is subjective? I'm basing my decisions in science. But then I append the second part of the sentence, which is that every decision that we make is subjective simply because we apply our own values, our own prejudices, and our own preconceptions to the design of any data visualization. But that doesn't mean that decisions are arbitrary. One of the things that I teach my students to do is to justify their choices. They need to be able to verbalize why they do the things that they do. Every single decision that we make in a visualization in terms of what we choose to show, how to show it, with the axes that you put in your graphics, the baseline, the colors, the legend, there needs to be a reason for each one of those. And you need to be prepared to talk about that reason. And the idea that I push in the Art of Insight, and again, I will extend on this reasoning in this future project, is that the process of designing a visualization is a dialogue. It's a dialogue that you have with yourself or that you can have with others in order to discuss all these reasons to see if anybody else can come up with better reasons or with better choices when designing this graphic. So let me show you an example of how all these elements sort of like work together or are in interplay with each other. All those dimensions, the people, the audience, how you present the data, the nature of the data. In How Chats Lie, one of my previous book, I discuss extensively this type of visualization, this cone, right, which is very common every year during hurricane season, which is about to begin. Obviously, as someone who lives in Miami much of the time, I get to see this map every single year, several times during hurricane season. As you probably know, it's a map that is intended to show where a hurricane may go in the following 5 days. I'm not going to bore you with details. You can read more about these in the references, but we have a lot of very good empirical evidence showing that most people who see this map misinterpret what this map is trying to show because they see that cone and they interpret the cone as an either or a type of graphic, right? If I am inside of the cone, I am in danger, right? Because I'm in the area of threat. If I am outside of the cone, I am not in danger. Many people call this cone the cone of death, right? And some people also, we also have some evidence to show that some people see this cone and they interpret it as a representation of the size of the hurricane. This is a great example to sort of like explain a mantra that I repeat in my classes, which is that what you design is not what people see, right? Or it's not what people interpret, right? Because the mental model that you apply when designing this graphic may not be the same mental model that your reader will apply when reading this graphic, right? And that gap needs to be bridged somehow. So in any case, what is this cone representing? Again, I'm not going to go into the details, but it's a representation of uncertainty. That's what it is. So essentially the way that this cone is created by the National Hurricane Center, which I collaborate with, along with several of my colleagues at the University of Miami. I am part of a research group that is trying to improve hurricane threat communication. And we are making some progress. But in any case, the way that this map is created is that the National Hurricane Center creates different models of where where the hurricane may go, the center of the hurricane may go in the following 5 days. And then among all those models that they create, believe it or not, very subjectively, because this is very manual, the experts are, oops, let me just get rid of those emojis. I just click with my elbow on my keyboard. The people on the at the National Hurricane Center, the experts, climatologists at the meteorologists at the National Hurricane Center, they, believe it or not, and this is not a mischaracterization on my part, they eyeball it. They say, I think that is going to go in this direction, right? I think that is going to be here and then here. They actually pinpoint what they think that is the most likely position of the storm center in the following 5 days. Obviously, they use their very long expertise in forecasting these in order to make this guess, but it's still a guess. And then they surround that guess with circles of increasing size, which essentially represent the uncertainty. So the way to read this map is essentially to imagine tons of little dots appearing and disappearing, each one of them representing a possible position of the storm center. Then they surround those circles with a line, they erase those circles, and the result is what we usually call the cone of uncertainty. Something also that many people don't know is that there is actually a relatively high probability that at any point in the following 5 days, the storm center may end up being outside the boundaries of the cone, because the cone only represents 2/3 of the uncertainty of these forecasts. But in any case, is the map wrong or is the map badly designed? I don't think so. The map is perfectly fine. The problem is that in order to interpret this map, in order to make this map more accessible, and accessibility is going to be something that I will talk briefly about in the next few slides, we need to explain it. Visualization, there is a very damaging myth in the world of data visualization that goes, show, don't tell. Well, no, that's wrong. We need to tell, because a visualization, the same thing as you may have said, the data speaks for itself, or let the data speak for itself. Data doesn't speak for itself. You need to interpret it. Visualization is the same way. No matter how well you design a visualization, particularly a visualization that represents complex phenomena, such as this one, the visualization will not be self-explanatory. It is impossible to design a self-explanatory visualization simply because your audience may not know about what is being represented in the visualization. But not only that, there's another question. This is what I wanted to go, and this extends beyond what I wrote in How Chat Slide, which is that why do we use the cone in the first place, right? Is it really that relevant to show where the center of the storm is going? It is not. It is not that relevant, because the cone is not a representation of risk, not in the statistical sense, but in the sense of threat. It's not a good representation of threats, because most of the most damaging threats during a storm is not the wind. It's actually storm surge and flooding and heavy rains. So the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center these days are experimenting with a new set of maps that they call the HDIs that focus much more on the possible threats that you may be exposed to. And this is where we are going in my research group. We are creating sort of like variations of these maps and different iterations of these types of maps. But there's another thing to consider, and this is something that I may write about. Again, remember that I'm thinking out loud with you, which is that the representation of threats in these maps, because of the very coarse nature of the data, is also very coarse, because it just shows you an equal risk for all these areas. But when we consider threats and risks, we need to consider socioeconomic inequalities. It is not the same thing, if you know Miami really well, it is not the same thing to live in certain neighborhoods that are very close to the coast and that are very poor, than to live inland in much richer suburbs that are much well protected against hurricanes. And we do need at some point to start considering these socioeconomic factors whenever we generate data about threats related, for example, to extreme weather events. And it's rarely done. It's not because the National Hurricane Center doesn't want to do it. They do, but it's hard to make these models. But the fact that something is hard is not a reason not to try. So maybe we should try in the future. So ethics, accessibility, and justice. These are three things that I'm getting extremely interested in, or have been getting extremely interested in the past few years. I hint a little bit about this in the Art of Insight And I will probably think much more deeply, because again, I use my books not only to communicate things, but to think clearly, more clearly at least, about the things that I want to learn about. So there are certain projects that I would recommend that you will take a look at. Obviously, Heather will count project, but there are many others out there that you may be interested in. For example, Chartability is a great project about increasing accessibility in data visualization. And then the work of Catherine D'Ignacio or Lauren Klein, the co-authors of Data Feminism, which is a book that doesn't appear here, but I strongly recommend. Both of them have new books coming out. Counting Feminicide by Catherine, that book is already out. And you can sort of like get a sneak peek through the website because the entire draft is available online. And then Lauren is working on a new book titled Data by Design. I am part of the group of a group of writers and authors who Lauren has put together to review the book. And I can tell you in advance, it's groundbreaking. It's going to be a changing for many people. So it's going to change the discourse of data visualization, in my opinion. And you can get a glimpse of the book if you take a look at the website, Data by Design. I link it from there. It's absolutely wonderful. If you want to learn more about it, I also wrote for it in my newsletter. It's a little bit of product placement, I guess. But if you want to sort of like follow with my current thoughts about visualization, maybe you want to follow my newsletter. It's completely free. I wrote briefly about the book and how wonderful I think that this book is going to be. So books like these and projects like these are making me think quite deeply about, again, these new fundamentals, because I don't think that thinking about accessibility, thinking about who is being represented, thinking about inequalities are add-ons. Because so far, most books about data visualization and more courses about data visualization, as I said before, have focused mostly on sort of like the structuring of the visualization. Those were considered the fundamentals of data visualization. And considerations about the nature of the information, about equality, justice, etc., those were add-ons, right? But I don't think that is the case. Those are also fundamentals of data visualization. They actually precede the design of any data visualization. So I've been doing a lot of reading, for example, about the history of data visualization, which is usually presented in sort of like this very heroic and glorified way, right? When we talk about people such as, for example, Francis Galton in the 19th century, we tend to praise this person as a genius. And he was a genius, but genius can be used for good or for ill. And this guy used his genius for ill because he was one of the founders of the eugenics movement in the 19th century. He used data visualization. He's the inventor of certain statistical terms and notions that we use to this day. For example, regression to the mean. But he did that in the context of an overall eugenics project. And this needs to be known, more known in the world of data visualization. The fact that the entire history of statistics is permeated by and is pushed and driven by an interest of pushing an eugenics project. It's not just Francis Galton. It's also Pearson, for example, right? The inventor of other statistical techniques. And this is fundamental in the history of statistics as it is as fundamental in the history of data visualization, because the thinking of these people and the misuse that these people made of statistics has continued to this day, right? One of the many things that I'm interested in or have been interested in throughout the years is reading about eugenics, and there are eugenics books to this day. For example, the most direct inheritor of Galton to this day is Charles Murray. Probably you have heard about him. He's the author of a famous book titled The Bell Curve. And also, he's also the author of a book titled Human Achievement. These are eugenic books, but more modern ones. And you can read Charles Murray and you are hearing Francis Galton in the 19th century. So this is another thing that we need to discuss more, and probably we'll do that in the project. And moreover, we also need to discuss, I mean, I wrote How Chat Slide years ago to teach people how to read graphics better. But I think that it may also be time to write a book that is more explicitly, maybe this will be sort of like combined with this project that I have in mind, but it could be a separate book on its own. How data visualization has been used to oppress people or to justify oppression, because that's exactly what this guy did. Because all his work was just a justification of oppression of women, of minorities, a racist project, and so on and so forth. These days, we are seeing a panic related to trans people, not only in the United States, but also in Canada, in the United Kingdom, etc. Probably you all have read stories that say that there has been an explosion in the number of trans and gender non-conforming people among minors. And these are charts that show that growth. These are actually not showing the number of trans people. These charts are showing the number of people in the United Kingdom and Sweden who are referred for treatment for gender dysphoria, which is not the same thing. Not all trans people have gender dysphoria in the first place. I'm not going to get into the weeds, but charts like these have been used recently to argue for there is something fishy here, right? There's something wrong. There's such a huge increase in numbers of trans people. What is going on here? And they have been used to essentially deprive people from medical treatments that they may need, right? Now, I wrote about these in my newsletter, how charts like these may reveal our inner prejudices. You can read about that down here. Because I actually challenge people in recent talks, because I've been involved in several talks related to how trans people are being oppressed in the United States and attacked in the United States. And actually challenge viewers saying, take a look at these graphics and examine your own reactions. Think about what your reaction is to these charts. Is your reaction surprise or shock? Oh my God, so many trans people, right? So many people being referred to, treatment for gender dysphoria. Then the problem may not be trans people. The problem may be you, because there's nothing wrong with these charts. These charts can be interpreted simply by saying, oh, great, more people who need treatment are receiving these treatments, right? They have gender dysphoria. They may need help with their gender dysphoria. Those are the emojis again. I'm going to get rid of them. They may need treatment for gender dysphoria, and great, they are receiving the treatments. That's fantastic. That's great news, right? There's nothing wrong with these. And also this notion that there has been an explosion in the number of trans people is complete bullshit. Because take a look at these numbers. These numbers are super tiny. These are all rates. But when we take a look at the actual number of minors, or teenagers mostly, that are being referred for gender dysphoria, for treatment for gender dysphoria, they are in the hundreds of people or few thousands of people. That's very tiny numbers. So there's barely being any explosion in these numbers. And actually what many media are doing these days is not to show you what happens after 2021. Because after 2021, or more recently, these numbers are plateauing, right? Essentially, this is not showing an explosion in the number of trans people. This is showing an explosion in access to treatment. So when access is made more available, obviously the number of people who take advantage of that access increases, just because that access is more available, right? And actually that supposed explosion is not the same in all countries. It's mostly in the UK and the United States, but other countries that also have gender clinics, the numbers are relatively flat. There's also this theory about the fact that being trans can be contagious, right? Maybe you have read about that in news media. It's exactly the same rhetoric that was used in the 1980s against gay people. If you know anything about the history of the gay rights movement, the same rhetoric that is used nowadays against trans people, particularly trans youth, is exactly the same rhetoric, verbatim, word by word, that was used by the exact same hate groups in the 1980s. So this is something that I also want to write about in the future, because it drives me absolutely crazy. More things, and perhaps a little bit more lighthearted than all these. So I'm also a fan of trying to put people at the center, of making data visualization perhaps a little bit more approachable, right? The way that I explained this in one of my previous books is to talk about the me factor. Where am I in the data? Because when we do that, suddenly data becomes a little bit more human, a little bit warmer, a little bit closer to us. The way that I usually explain to people is like, let's say, for example, that you're doing I actually talked to a group of economists the other day about this. Let's suppose that you're doing a graph showing, a density curve or a histogram showing a wealth, in the United States, a histogram of wealth. So obviously the shape that you will get will be a very high bump over here on the lower end of the chart, and a very long tail over here, representing the shrinking amount of extremely rich people, right? So you will get sort of like a very skewed distribution. Most people will be here and far fewer people will be on the long tail of extremely rich people. That's interesting per se, right? Because it shows you inequality, right? But we can make that type of graphic a little bit more interesting if before we show the graphic, we ask the reader, what is your estimated wealth? And then you have the reader put their estimated wealth. And then you show the graphic with a line that says, you are here. 60% of people are poorer than you are, and 40% of people are richer than you are. When you add that element, something clicks inside your brain because you see yourself in the data in comparison to the rest of the data set. We have very good evidence to show that when we can add that me component to a graphic, the graphic becomes more engaging and more approachable. So years ago, a project that I art directed, which is a collaboration between an investigative reporting agency in Brazil called Lupa, then the Google News Initiative, and a group of Brazilian designers, takes advantage of these. This is called At the Epicenter. This is the Brazilian version of the project. It was later adapted to the United States by the Washington Post. We also designed that version, but the Brazilian version was the most popular one by far. So essentially what it is that it's a graphic that shows you the number of people who died of COVID-19 in Brazil, but it doesn't show you just the numbers. The numbers were shown everywhere using bar graphs, line graphs, etc. And we will wonder, what about if we put the reader at the center and we show the data, the number of people who died of COVID-19, how big the circle around you would be if everyone who died of COVID-19 had been your neighbor? How big the circle will be around you? So you can input your address over there. I lived in Brazil for 3 years. Years ago, that was my address at the time. So I put my address in there. It pinpoints my location. You are here. And then in a step-by-step fashion, it shows you, a few days after the pandemic began in Brazil, 46 people died, and these are your neighbors around you. These are the 46 people in mind. But then after like years of the pandemic, this is how big the circle is, right? More than 600,000 people had died of COVID-19 in Brazil by the time that this project was updated. Probably most of you don't know anything about the geography of Sao Paulo, but I do. And I can tell you that Sao Paulo is highly, densely populated. This is a huge, huge circle. So seeing this circle is absolutely shocking. And then the project, it lets you save the map and share it. And then it compares the number of people who died of COVID-19 in Brazil with the population of a city or a town. And this changed over the months. So it's the equivalent of São Caetano do Sul, which is a town in Brazil, in São Paulo, actually, next to São Paulo, which had that amount of people, inhabitants, 600,000 people. This project very quickly became viral, if we can use this term, in the sense that it was shown on the most viewed news program, TV news program in the country. It was picked up by tons of news organizations. It received hundreds of thousands of visits. It became extremely popular in social media because something clicked inside people's minds. Now I see it. Now I understand the scope of the catastrophe. All these graphics that I saw before, bar graphs and line graphs, those are excellent. They need to be there, but they are also highly abstract. You don't see the people in those graphics. You just see the numbers. Those types of graphics have a numbing effect on your brain. But when you see the data represented this way, suddenly you can relate the data to your own life. And then finally, again, this is just an assortment of ideas. There will be more in the project. I am also a great believer in, whenever it is appropriate, to add a little bit of humor to data visualization. So a few years ago, actually, I persuaded another friend of mine, Nigel Holmes, who is a long-time infographics and visualization designer, very well known for using very subtle humor in his graphics, to write a book about that topic. I say, Nigel, you're the person to write about these, right? And I am the co-editor of a data visualization book series for CRC Press. It's called the AK Data Visualization Book Series. And we publish Nigel Holmes's Joyful Infographics, which is essentially it's what the book title says. It's about joy. It's about humor. It's about how to introduce a more friendly voice to the representation of data. Obviously, we cannot do this with every single project. I would never dare using humor in a project about COVID-19, right? But whenever it is appropriate, something also can click in your readers' mind. Something can make the graphic more attractive, more personable, more approachable, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show you just another project that I art directed years ago. In this case, in collaboration with my friend Nadie Bremer, who is a famous, extremely famous and extremely talented visualization designer from the Netherlands. So, and this was also in collaboration with Google Trends. So Nadie was extremely interested in visualizing what people search for in Google when we search for why is my dog or why is my cat, what comes after, right? What do people search for when we search for why is my pet doing something? And based on that, she designed, I must say, she designed and my art directed. This was a lot of fun. A project titled Why Do Cats and Dogs? That's the website, whydocatsanddogs.com. And it's absolutely delightful. It has lots of humor, is very colorful, beautiful animations of cats and dogs. So the way that it works is that you enter the project, you see those cute pets over there, and then the project lets you choose whether you want to see dogs or whether you want to see cats. So let's go to dogs. And then the project, why do dogs, right? What are the most common searches? So why do dogs? Why is my dog doing something, right? There are different types of searches. Why does a dog? Why do dogs? Why is a dog? Why are dogs? Those are the searches that were considered in the project. And then using circle sizes, Nadie visualized what are the most common types of searches. So licking is the most common one. Why is my dog licking? And then what comes after? Licking people, licking so much, licking feet. That happened to me yesterday. Licking me, licking you, and so on and so forth. And then the next most common type of search is why is my dog eating? Because as you probably know, if you have a dog, dogs eat very weird stuff. So why is my dog eating grass or why is my dog eating poop? Those are the most common types of searches related to eating. This is delightful. We laughed so much designing this project, and readers of this project also laughed a lot when reading it. We had the proof because it became really, really popular. So humor is a very powerful tool whenever it is appropriate, right? Making people smile, right? In a very gentle and very elegant way. And one last word. I was actually thinking about a quote that I could use as a preface to this new project, whatever it ends up being, a talk, a workshop, a book, even whatever. In The Art of Insight, I quoted extensively a French writer slash philosopher, a Nobel Prize winner called Albert Camus. And I love his work, I love his writings. And I found another quote that I may be using for the new project. It's a quote that comes from the talk that he gave when he accepted the Nobel Prize in literature. And it's a quote that refers to writing, but when I read it, I thought this applies completely to what I do. And the quote goes, "Whatever our personal weaknesses may be, the nobility of our craft will always be rooted in two commitments difficult to maintain: the refusal to lie about what one knows and the resistance to oppression." Thanks so much. That's all that I have for you today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alberto. That I'm kind of speechless. It was just amazing. Thank you so much.
It was
I
a little bit improvised, I must say.
Well, that's one thing I think about you a lot. I take a lot of I don't know of advice, but I've watched you work so many years where you're always presenting something that you're thinking about and that's alive. And I find your presentations so real and tangible because of that. And so I try to
because
be more like you in the fact that it's
because
improvised and it's
I use my
thinking out loud.
presentations. I use my presentations the same way that I use my books. They are not tools to communicate ideas to others. They are tools for me to think more clearly about things, that stuff that I care about. That's the
Yeah.
reason why they are sometimes a little bit rambling or improvised or something. So yeah.
I have certainly not experienced them as rambling. And thank you so much. You can see all the love in the chat. And we do have time for a few questions.
I'm not in a rush. I'm going to take a minute, if you don't mind, for all of you to see my slides. That link should work. This is an open link to my Google Drive. So you can download the slides from there.
Yep, that link works great. Thank you so much. Always generous as always.
Great.
So if you're in the room and you want to turn your microphone on and ask a question, we ask that you raise your Zoom hand if possible. If you go ahead, Nicole, go ahead and unmute yourself, and then we'll get to the questions in the chat as well.
Hi, Dr. Cairo.
Hi, hello.
Hi. Thank you. This was a fantastic presentation, and I have two questions. First one is, given the way that data visualization has been used to oppress women, people of color, and trans people, how can we encourage data visualization companies to address the harm that this field has caused? And my second question is, and I posted them in the chat,
Yeah,
and my
I'm reading
second
them right
question
now.
is, would free memberships from mapping and other data visualization companies, as well as free courses and education in these subjects for women, people of color, and trans people, especially people who live at the intersection of these three identities, be a step forward towards repairing this harm?
Those are fantastic questions. And the answer that comes to mind is that I don't know and I don't know, but I have a few ideas about both. So I don't know whether regarding your first question is like how we encourage data visualization companies to redress the harm. I mean, I am very good at shaming people unintentionally in a very gentle way, and that's what I'm planning to do. So I'm planning to just shame people because I felt ashamed of past of some of my own work in the past. And I talk a little bit about it, by the way, in the Art of Insight, in which in a couple of instances, the Art of Insight is a series of interviews. And in a couple of the interviews, I actually refer to cases in which I unjustifiably criticize the work of a couple of people. And then in hindsight, I realized, well, they were right. And I was completely wrong. So it's like, and I felt ashamed about it. So shame is a very powerful tool, particularly if it is done in a gentle and constructive way. It's saying, you know, we have not done it correctly. And here's what we can do it. How we can do it better because it's possible to do it better. So it's not just shaming, it's shaming and then opening the door to ways of doing things better, showing people the evidence of what has been done wrong and then showing them the way to improve their work. So that's what I would like to do with this more like the historical part, which obviously I want to talk about Galton, but also talk about many other instances, many other people. Also the graphics that I mentioned about oppression of trans people at the moment. I want to discuss that, but just to open people's eyes to these realities. Because I tend to be optimistic, and I think that people in general, perhaps with a few exceptions, right, that are ill-intentioned, but common people are well-intentioned. And sometimes what we see out there in terms of things that are being doing wrong, they are not done wrong intentionally. It's because people don't know better. But once you show them the realities behind all these oppression, etc., then they tend to start changing their mind, right? So I'm a great believer in that. And then regarding your second part, so I don't know whether that is a solution, but it's certainly something worth trying. So one thing that I would like to do, one of the many things that I would like to do in the future is to bring back a project that I did in 2000 between 2012 and 2016 or 17, which is a series of massive online courses that were open to anybody, completely free of charge to everybody, and then showing people open source and free visualization tools. They were very basic, very elementary introductions to data visualizations, and they were taken by tens of thousands of people from all over the world. So maybe that could be one way, right? Spreading the word, and helping people educate themselves, learn a little bit more, and not charging for it. I think that will be a great tool. So yeah, maybe. And then I'm also collaborating with several organizations, like, for example, in the United States, the Trans Journalists Association. I am an ally and collaborator of that association. So yeah, that could be the path. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, Santiago, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me there? Awesome.
Yes.
No, first of all, Alberto, thank you so much. I saw some of your data vision articles in grad school, and I'm just so excited that you're here. We call it Hurricane One. So it's very cool to have the chance to get to hear it directly from you.
Thank you, Santiago.
My two questions are a little bit more technical in thinking of how to grow as a kind of data vision enthusiast. My first one is kind of what communities can we tap into, maybe to connect more about data visualization. I think you mentioned a couple, but if you can expand on that, that'd be great. And second, kind of what programs would you suggest exploring so that we can arrive to kind of engaging and novel visuals beyond the static charts and graphs? Because every time you show something like, okay, that's awesome, but I don't know how to do it. I know how was it created. It's more technically, what are some entry points or
yeah. So I mean, communities. I mean, I would obviously suggest this. Sorry. The Data Visualization Society will be a place to look into. This is a professional association, and they share resources on a regular basis. They have an online and print magazine called Nightingale, after Florence Nightingale, the famous 19th century nurse and also innovator in data communication. So the Data Visualization Society will be I think the place to begin connecting with other people and getting resources. And in terms of programs and tools, I usually don't recommend tools because I may be honest. I mean, most of the work that I do with design tools, not even visualization tools. I use a visual design tool called Adobe Illustrator, which I have been using for 30 years, I believe. And I can create almost any type of graphic with that, but I need to do it manually, not programmatically, right? So, but there are many tools out there that you compare design tools with. So for example, there's a tool called raw graphs, like raw meat, raw graphs, which is open source and free. And there are several visualization tools nowadays also have freemium versions. I'm thinking about a Data Wrapper, for example, and Flourish. Even Tableau has a free version, Power BI also. So any of those tools, I think, are great starting points. But if you really want to create fully customized visualizations, what I will recommend is to learn a little bit of coding. So learning a little bit either Python or R or JavaScript or D3, any of those will essentially open a world of possibilities. But not everybody likes code. I particularly don't like coding at all. If I can avoid coding, I avoid coding. I prefer to handcraft my own visualizations.
Thank you, Robert.
That's a very good question. So Lynn is asking if anybody knows of online courses or other training materials that are specifically entrepreneurial and equity focused. Yeah, Ellie Holder is someone to look into, has done several research projects related to these, which I mentioned, by the way. I mentioned one of them in the Out of Insight. I think that a couple of you also mentioned Stephanie Evergreen. She has done some work in this area also, so following her would not be a bad idea. And then Lauren Klein, Catherine D'Ignacio, Data Feminism will be a good place to start. It's a great, in my opinion, it's a great foundational book that changed the conversation and will keep changing the conversation in the future.
And follow Alberto's newsletter that he shared, because you can see that it's on his mind, and it won't be long until.
But I'm not an expert in any of these things, and
yep.
I would recommend to follow other people first. Obviously, if you want to follow my newsletter, go ahead and do it. I mean, it's free, and I share my thoughts. So it's a good way to see what I'm thinking or what I'm reading at the moment. So it's a way for me to experiment with ideas. And in every posting in the newsletter, I also post links to music that I'm listening to while thinking about it. So you can listen to anything from Leonard Cohen to heavy metal in some cases, depending on my mood.
Awesome. All right. We are going to leave it there for today. And we will be back next week. Next week, we have an expert on how to think through the possibilities and options and make some choices about collecting data from American Indian and Alaska Native communities and really getting into some of the nitty-gritty of some misconceptions that are easy to fall into even when you're trying hard and reading the right stuff. So that's what we're going to do next week. As promised, the video and all of the links and all of the resources that we have recommended, we absolutely are going to share all of those things, and we'll share them in the We All Count online data equity community, which is free. It's not a membership site, but we can't put all the links in the chat right now because we won't capture them all. So you can head over to that and the links will all show up there in the next couple of days.
Some of you are also recommending music, which is great.
Oh, they're recommending music.
Yeah, I am an omnivore when it comes to music. I tend to listen
Yeah.
Yeah,
you have some really cool taste in music.
Yeah.
I've heard you listening to some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, first of all, to everybody who came today, shared their resources, shared their ideas, helped collaborate around the community, we really, really appreciate it. None of this would happen without you. And so I hope you take really good care of yourselves and each other over the weekend. And to Alberto, a huge thank you. I know how busy you are, and it really meant a lot to a lot of people that you came and shared your materials and ideas. I'm really, really grateful.
I welcome the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.